Hello, everybody. We are opening
Hello.
our first planetary meeting, and I'm sorry to tell you, we are having pizza here in a very beautiful place, and I wish I could share it with you, but since you're so far away, we'll give you the privilege to talk first. And I would like to give the privilege to the person we are guesting tonight. Chris, we'd like to hear you for 3 minutes talk about what are the main roles in the psychology are playing in America, whether the more radical or the mainstream or researcher role, what roles are they playing? So the word is for Chris.
So welcome everybody. It's an honor to have a chance to speak to you this directly or indirectly. Yeah, I think Donat has posed some provocative and thoughtful questions. When I think about the different roles that we play, I as community psychologists, I think that you know, whether you're you know, an activist or an academic or a consultant or somebody involved in policy making, that each role has its distinctive strengths and opportunities to contribute. And as a full and effective field, it behooves us to try to understand, identify, and benefit from each of those roles. In the United States, we have community psychologists who work in each of these areas and work across areas. I think one of the challenges that we have is people not only promoting their own area, but doing so sometimes at the expense of other forms of contribution. And I think that weakens us as a field. Let's see, just a second. Maybe I have some background noise here.
It's okay. We can pass them.
So is that better? Brianna?
It's better for me, Chris. I think it's good if we're not talking, if we mute.
Good point. Thanks, David.
Speak about everybody else if they can mute, and then our noise doesn't come across.
Right.
I will call you again for the second question. Thank you. So now I would like to hear Wolfgang on the first question.
Yes, hello. Do you want me to be on screen? So this is the pizza place, and that's a intriguing and very interesting experiment. So what role should community psychology play in different areas of our planet? I think community psychology should play a crucial role in transdisciplinary routines and community groups, and with sociologists, with community psychologists, with urban and rural planners, with architects, with administrators. So in order to find solutions for common community challenges in neighborhoods, excuse me, but also in urban areas and rural spaces. So what community psychology needs is to intensify a more or less systemic perspective, but also to approaches to identify the strengths of the community itself. So like the indigenous people of Nova Scotia say, the wisdom is already in the community. So to play an important and helpful role in current and future ecosystems, community psychology, in my perspective, needs to redesign its identity from an expert-driven discipline and a profession to a learning system which is integrating different types of knowledge.
Maybe tired. See, which is waiting for us.
Hello? I can't hear very well. Okay, thank you very much. Let me put my quick timer on.
3 minutes.
So I'm contributing from Australia. It's normal for Australian universities to make an acknowledgement of the people on whose land we're working from. So I'd like to acknowledge the ancestors and those coming after from the Turrbal people and the Yagra people. So look, Donata asked us about 3 roles and asked which of those we should be doing. I don't think it's necessary to accept those 3 roles as they are being given. It's like if we were asked what roles should alchemists play, we might say, well, none really, because alchemy is not a real approach that's useful, but it might lead to something useful. And I think that there was a number of points from other contributors. And I noticed that Caroline said, I don't see much way of contemporary community psychology thinking, and that community psychology ideas are a little tired. They draw on literatures that are decades old. And there were similar comments from Leotie and from Wolfgang and from Chris, who talked about community psychology as a place for contestation. So I would say, look, community psychology from the US, of course, it began in Australia, in Britain, in Europe in the 1930s, but in America, we're talking about from the 1960s onwards. Since that time, psychology has been subject to massive critique by critical psychologists. The psi complex has been subjected to critique by people like Nicholas Rose. Modernism is under attack. The rational unitarist subject has been completely dismantled by feminists and psychoanalysts and post-colonialists. The individual in context is really under the hammer, even from clinical psychology these days. People working in the tradition of David Smale. Western social science is under attack from people like Linda Toohey-Smith. So I would like to say that the role that's most necessary, in my view, at the moment for community psychology is some fundamental rethinking about the frame of reference within which we're approaching problems to do with power, to do with subjectivity, and to do with collectives.
David, your time is up.
2 minutes, 24 seconds, actually, but there you go.
Thank you. Fernandez.
Here. Donata, can I start? Okay. 3 minutes. Okay. The volunteers. Okay. Yes, I think that community psychologists, that they are playing very different roles in very different communities and places. So from my experience is more research. So and I see that in research there is plenty of people doing community psychology, even if they don't present themselves as community psychologists. And this is something community psychologists who try to also engage more with those people that is research and action, but they don't as psychology. It's also I cannot hear me. Right? Yeah. hearing me. Just a minute. The comments here in this room, I cannot hear very well. There is a lot of background noise in the ICP call. So let me, yes, in the room, in the Zoom. Well, sorry about that. This is a little bit messy at the moment. But I was that at least community psychologists should try to engage more with interdisciplinary research and also try to work with people that are doing community work, even if they don't present themselves as community psychologists. So I think that but not enough recognition of community psychology work. So yeah, that is.
Mainly we are in a pizzeria because university is closed now. So to reach people from you, we are in a setting which is not traditional. That's why you hear a lot of voices. That's why it's difficult to hear. So, but it's very nice video. We are happy to hear you. And now, Ornelas, we are sorry not to see you here, but we wanted to speak. 3 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Renata. Unfortunately, I am not able to be with you, unfortunately. I think there's two distinguished activists, academics, and consultants or other designations. For the last 3 decades, we have been trying to put all this together. In the university, many times there's been a space for radical ideas to be disseminated. And the research that we do is research with social impact. The research inspires the practitioners and the academics to change, to make changes. And we are very committed with change process. We really believe that in a democracy, everything is possible to change. So we are ending homelessness in Europe. And we are being very successful through housing first. We are in the schools, particularly in the areas of Europe with the problematic success, educational success. We have been put in practice an ecological perspective of schools, families, communities, and making changes. In the area of violence against women, we are helping the movement of women to go back to the human rights and the women's movement instead of being victims of psychologists with psychological control and medication. And so this is 3 examples that we are researchers, activists, and political public ideas. And I think it's possible to be all together. At this moment, I'm preparing my jubilation lesson 2 weeks. And the jubilation lesson, it's not just a formal academic act. It's been preparing the way that we preparing and the ideas that I'm going to present. It's to help to make changes in Portugal in terms of mental health. So this distinguished, I never had this problem. And I think it's artificial contradiction. We can put all these things together.
For the moment, I'll call you again for the second question. But I would like to have Jacqueline now talk.
Hello, everybody. You can hear it is rather chaotic. Hello, David. I think that what I have to say is very different because the community psychology in South Africa emerges from a radical past, in that it was the community psychologists who were opposed to mainstream psychology in the 80s. And so the roles were to support people who were traumatized by violence and so on. With the shifts to a new government and the mainstreaming of community psychology, there is still a very positive, motivated cohort of academics who will train community psychologists in thinking alternatively. But as soon as those psychologists go into the settings, the government settings now of clinical psychology or counseling psychology or in correctional services, they are expected to work in a very ameliorative way. And the volume of the problem is very great because we haven't had adequate services to really address the levels of trauma that exist in our society. Very, very high levels of trauma due to poverty, due to inequality, and due to unemployment. And so community psychologists could play a very good role. They are often trained very well to play that role, but the settings in which they work are not educated in the role that they can play. And so we get stuck. So there really is a motivation to work differently, but unfortunately, they're often forced to work amelioratively rather than working transformatively. And we need to work much more in advocacy to educate the settings so that we can really roll out psychology to the majority of people. So, yeah, that's where I want to end it. We'll come back. Okay.
Should be talking to Kelvin should be talking.
I think it's all of the
Yeah. Carolyn Kagan is no longer on. Okay, so we pass on the second question, and then
I'm here. I'm here.
Carolyn, Carolyn, it's your turn. Are you there?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Ciao. Okay, we are listening to you, Carolyn.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm talking from.
Ciao.
Okay. I'm talking from a UK perspective. UK rapidly becoming one of the most unequal places in the world, with huge numbers of problems and with a government that is the most right-wing government this century, which is kind of saying quite a lot for the UK. But I agree with people that have suggested that there's a false distinction between activism and professionalism. In the UK, there's a history of community practices in other disciplines and of community mobilizations, whether they're labour-based, campaign-based, or whatever. So what is the space for community psychology? I think the space for community psychologists is to bring a systemic and critical perspective, to work with people from the bottom up, to work with marginalized people, which requires a thorough understanding of power and how it operates at all levels, pushing for change in local, regional, and national and international spheres, accompanying and advocating as necessary. Accompaniment is an interesting concept, quite new to community psychology. When I first wrote about it, I got turned down by community psychology journals who said it wasn't community psychology, but we see it now becoming community psychology. So what does this mean? It means bringing those skills of organizational development, of relationships, of alliances and coalition building into play in different contexts. And all of that rather assumes that those are the skills that community psychologists have. I think it's a very big challenge for universities and for those working in them to prioritize some of the imperatives that there are at the moment, the imperatives particularly for the environment, for the economy and for social justice. I think it's difficult for them to address those issues in psychology departments. Other discipline areas, and right back to where I started, other discipline areas find it somewhat easier to address some of those issues. So sometimes organizational, environmental, even hard sciences and the arts have more opportunities for looking at some of the big challenges and addressing some of the big challenges that there are around. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Now we are going to start by Chris. So, okay. And then we go.
It's still the first round, I think. Are you still timing us, Donato? Is your time on? Hey everyone, Donato's got a smart watch here next to me, and so I'm just waiting for it to press the. Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. It's great to see some of you. I think Carolina, you come there from Melbourne. Look, I think this is a sort of a tricky question given the nature of community psychology in Australia. So I guess there's multiple sorts of roles, and part of it really is shaped by the nature of training within the Australian context. So at VU we've got a community psychology program that trains people practice in particular sorts of ways. But I also think there's a way to think about community psychology not through the lens of the profession or the professional practice, but to think about community psychology as a critical orientation that's driven or organized around sets of values, principles that finds expression within context. So I have found it necessary to imagine and to think about community psychology through adjacent theories, whether it's critical race, decolonial or indigenous approaches. And from that sort of vantage point for me, community psychology has always been a discipline that is in the making or in the construction as it responds to context. So it means that we have to be sort of agile, not in the neoliberal sense of universities being agile, but we have to be a discipline that creates and is responsive to the sorts of setting circumstances that we found ourselves in. So community psychology in lots of ways for me has been a discipline full of tension because of its anchoring in a particular version of psychology. David, I think you talk about this as the psi complex. We do struggle with that. But what forms of psychology do we want, and what are the other ways in which psychology can be useful, redefined, and reorganized once it comes into conversation with different knowledge traditions? And I think that's really important because community psychology, as something that is generative, as something that aspires to be transformative, has to be something that has to be reimagined through knowledge production processes, which opens up all sorts of alternative possibilities for us. But what that then means in terms of the profession, the licensing and so forth in our context, that might have implications for that, or it might mean that community psychology is something that has to be
plural, and there has to be multiple versions of it that we can accommodate. Thank you. The time has gone off.
We are going to start again then from Chris and Chris, the other Chris online. Yes, and he's going to talk about how well are we doing in transmitting to the other generation, the younger generation, our community psychology or what community psychology. How is the transgenerational relation going? Chris, you have the word for 2 minutes if you want.
Okay. So two thoughts when we think about intergenerational issues here. One is a systemic intergenerational view of a healthy organization, and the other is an intergenerational mentoring program. One of the leaders in clinical psychology, development of innovative programs in the United States in the 70s, shared his view of a healthy psychology program or psychology department. And it, will reflect to a certain extent some of the privilege that exists in the United States, but I think the overall idea is a valuable one. Basically, in his view, a healthy program has strength in faculty cohorts at sort of beginning career, mid-career, and late career stages, which would map on to the ranks of assistant, associate, and full professor in the United States. The assistant professors bring value because they're bringing in new ideas and perspectives. They're relating well to grad students as role models, and they bring new energy to departments and programs. And keep things attuned to the spirit of the times. The associate professors or mid-career folks are the sinews that hold the department together, connecting across time span the early career and later career folks. And they provide leaderships for programs, smaller parts of programs like field work, and sometimes for entire programs. And they've established ongoing research programs so they can engage grad students in that. On the other, and then the full professors provide leadership at the program, department, university, and sometimes national levels. They mentor younger faculty and help them connect with opportunities for career development. And they take the lead in garnering new resources for the training program and protecting the program and its existing resources. In a healthy program. Is that time?
Yes, time is up because it's 2 minutes this time. And then we'll have another.
Okay. I thought we might have 3, sorry. Go ahead.
To say if she had any mentoring or if she had any experience, like he explained, he had 2 kinds of experience. Did you have any of these experiences? And how did you feel? So yeah, so that's why I want to have your opinion.
So yeah, I think I have a very different experience. 1 minute. Okay. Yeah, I was saying that I think I have a very different experience from that one. Also, because I wasn't trained as a community psychologist, I had one module, community, that was titled Community Psychology. So my attempt to enter the field, it was always like that, an attempt to. So of course, I had a master and PhD supervisor that she's a community psychology, but she presented herself as a community psychologist. She does community psychology work, but I wasn't trained in my degree to be a community psychologist. So I think that there is a lack of exchange from older to younger generations, and I am not so young. So I think that we need to include also more young people in those in these discussions. And the other point that I think that is also difficult for an early career researcher to do community psychology research, because most of the time the methods that we use take time. Action research is not something that we do without resources, and from someone that need to publish and need to show that is producing something relevant for the academic world. It's very difficult to come from a community psychology orientation and at the same time play the rules of publishing and trying to get a stable permanent position. So I think that this is a challenge for community psychologists or people that are interested in community psychology. And the other, just the other point that I wanted to make is about the also resistance. So it's not also easy to present yourself as a community psychology to other psychologists. There is a lot of resistance from social psychology, for example, towards community psychologists. This is my experience. We are seen as atheoretical. It's like that everything that we do is just from our heart. It's just our values, our principles. It's just activism is not really research, is not really theory. And I think that for early researchers, this is one of the biggest challenges, how to build a career in research and at the same time in community psychology, and at the same time be recognized as someone that is producing theory and relevant theory for the field. Yeah. So.
Thank you. And I'm going to change it with the pattern because here I function better if I give the microphone to a person near the other one.
Okay.
So Jackie, would you consider that more fun?
Sure. Sorry, we've changed the system a little because it's easier to pass the computer around the table like this. So it's me again. I'm speaking and thinking of South Africa. In terms of intergenerational exchange, I think that we are in probably a healthier position than many other countries. And what has helped is that the whole decolonial turn in psychology supports ideas of community psychology. There is a real challenge, particularly from younger students towards mainstream psychology, really sort of asking why it is so relevant, why it is relevant to them. And of course, community psychology, because of building from the grassroots upwards, is much more, it makes much more sense to the younger students. And so we can see that our recent textbook, we have, I think, about 30 new authors, new academics who are coming into the field in South Africa. At this conference, I think 7 of our 27 departments are represented here. So there really is a regeneration of community psychology academically, but that is not necessarily spilling out into the practice field. And that's the challenge for us. And finally, community-based service learning, but I'll come back to that later. All right, Renata, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, as you already know, everybody, I have a somewhat radical view on that. I believe that community psychology, on the one hand, can survive if it doesn't work together with other disciplines. And the most intriguing citation I can share is from a young student who came to us in Germany as community psychologist, and she was interested in community psychology, and she visited one of our meetings. And at the end, she came back to me and said, "Do you know why they don't want to learn?" And that was kind of an interesting thing. So what I'm trying to say is that young people and maybe also people from other disciplines sometimes have the feeling that we are kind of stuck in a academic system and in a professional system where, which means that community psychology looks like as if it doesn't want to learn, because we always rely on the traditional community psychology thing. We always rely on textbooks and things like that, on traditional teaching. So it's really interesting. The teaching formats didn't really change. There are few examples, like in Italy with your system, Donata, and in other places, but all together, it's still like a traditional. It tries to achieve from a outsider point of view to be successful in the traditional field of psychology, and I'm sure that doesn't work. So, and the funny thing is, once we start to learn and once we start to be kind of a radical change system, then that is my experience with European psychology, the official psychology, then they start to be, oh, that's interesting. So we have to look to those people because they are helping us to apply a different approach. And that's when you listen to the president of the European psychologists today, he was kind of all of a sudden he's starting to promote community psychology because we are thinking different. So what I'm trying to say is, let us appreciate and let us thinking different, and let us appreciate and support radicalism and community psychology as a special feature, because
If you can really answer the question, but
yes,
that's
yeah, that's me. Well,
Okay, so I like to know because I can, for the first time, I away from my role. And the reason I ask this question is very important because it's a big question whether, in fact, the question we should rely on is whether we have to promote community psychology and therefore as a discipline which is in university and a discipline which is also a profession, okay? Or if not, because actually we don't need any theory to know what the problem of the world are. You know, climate change, inequality, we don't need any theory. We need to work on changing them politically. So the reason they say, oh, you don't have any theory, is often a reason to say you shouldn't work on that. And therefore do the most, neutral things, okay? So this is very clear that you don't do. But sometime in a university, they can kick you out if you completely don't, because university, engaged country, even democratic country, are islands of freedom up to a point. Right? The point is that you don't go against the system very much. Now, what is changed in the world is now that we have very, very powerful men at the top. We are rich and have the weapons and have everything. So even in the Western democracy, we are going to work in a totalitarian government, open or not open. So that's another threat is important. So for us, as a small discipline, is also still important if we, this specialty of community psychology, we kind of hold it dear and transmit it to our generation. Or if in some country, once you go away, like it happened in Germany, the first professor, there is nobody teaches community psychology at university. So it's true that you can still find it in books and stuff. Okay, but that's why I would like you to answer. This, what are you doing to transmit the knowledges, whatever you do, or the in Oceania in general, or something maybe if you know what happens in New Zealand also, if you are having more students studying community psychology, or what happens in America, also in other fields, because that's the development is happening in the world. This is the focus of the question. 2 minutes. to give us, then we just talk about.
Okay, so now to just ask me to focus on answering the question. So I guess the main way of transmitting community.
Caroline, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, so picking up on, this is some discussion in the meantime. The role that you described community psychologists as playing is almost identical to the role that Kathy McCormack played. She left school at 15. She had no degrees in anything. She learned from popular education. She learned from tenants groups. She learned from community development workers. She learned from experience, but she could work with people. She was supportive. She could mobilize collectives. She could engage in political work. She achieved the most extraordinary changes in her community to eliminate damp housing, therefore reducing carbon dioxide emission, health problems, misery, and poverty to some extent at the same time. But when I worked with Kathy, which was for many years, well, nearly 40 years, I did find that there were discussions that we could have that I would call discussions that come from an applied critical theory perspective, which was sometimes useful because sometimes forms of individualism can slip into community activism, for example, or there are assumptions about what context is in relation. So it seems to me that I think there's some absolutely wonderful work being done by people who call themselves community psychologists, but it's not community psychology as far as I'm concerned. The work that people like Kathy do is fantastic. There are hundreds of thousands of them around the country and the world, as you know. Only a few get mentioned, but that's really important. They're doing the things you say. But I don't think we need to study psychology for 3 or 4 years and then PhDs and training courses to be able to do that. In fact, it makes us worse. In general, we become less effective the more education we have. So it seems to me, yes, there's a mode of operation as a citizen that's a sort of intelligent activism, but I don't see any point in us developing a huge sort of institutional system with its journals and its meetings and all the rest of it just to call that community psychology. It's not, it's great activity, but is there not something else that those of us who spend a lot of time working on theory and ideology and such like can add, which is important too? Over.
Can I reply to that? I think you're right. I knew Kathy, and I've known many activists like Kathy, who, as you say, we've taken over this meeting, ICCP, briefly. I can respond in the chat if ICCP is back.
Can you hear us now, Carolyn?
Yeah.
Go on, try again, Chris.
Okay, so I don't know where it actually stopped. So I was just making the point that we've got.
You hadn't got very far. You hadn't got very far.
I didn't get very far. Okay, so I was just saying that we've got the formal program through which we transmit knowledge about community psychology, and then I also had this suggestion that part of what I've been doing is not so much in the service of community psychology, but more in the service of community. So how can this be a basis from which to depart to address challenges of racism, racial oops, it's gone again.
Do you have anything further to say in response to David? You're muted.
Yeah, I was going to say, perhaps the issue is how you can bring those things that you bring when you work with Kathy, or when an academic works with a community worker of any sort, how you can bring the understandings that you have that are often theoretically based, often with a wide knowledge of other possible theoretical perspectives, but how you can marry the two. So many places have activists with broad understandings born from their practice, but not everywhere. And so I think there are some big voids, but I also think that one of the real dangers in community activists who don't work with community psychologists, or indeed with applied geographers or public health workers, I think there are other discipline fields that can do the same as community psychology in this sense, is that they can inadvertently slip in to some of those traps that David mentioned. They can slip into bigotry. They can slip into not understanding how social capital can exclude people, how strong intra-group working can exclude people. So they don't necessarily always have the same kinds of broad perspectives that community psychologists might be able to bring. That's kind of my short answer.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've worked with groups of unemployed people, for example, for whom the problem is migrants who they believe are taking their jobs. And there can be racist discourses being peddled. So there is always a role for critique in working with people, I think. And people become dominated by the current contemporary discourses, which
We're
talking in the meantime.
David,
Yeah, that's
we're having. What did he say?
talking in the meantime.
Yeah, but David, we want now the four of you that are online to talk about the second or third question. So you have 3 minutes each, because we don't know how long this line will hold. So we're giving you the privilege to do first, okay? So now you have 3 minutes to talk about the second and third question. So the last one was, the wisdom of, remember the third question. So tell us what you want to say in 3 minutes, and then we can have all the other people online, and then we'll say goodbye to you and finish the meeting on person, because the line is keeping falling down. So we can't hold it, okay? So you can talk now for 3 minutes.
Okay, are you speaking to us all?
About second or third question. All four of us, to all of you, to all the online people. The people are here, no, yes, we decided that.
Okay, so I've spoken a lot.
Okay, so we were talking about how you're transmitting to other generation. And you heard perhaps Fernanda said that she didn't get much mentoring or tutoring in her formation, okay? And maybe you can say which way are doing in Oceania to help the generational transmission.
Okay.
Or community psychology or not. That's it. And the other question was, obviously, what am I, if we can make what have written to us, as if you read the thing, Chris and other people have asked if we can promote a network, a support network of one kind, and the other support network will be a network of community psychology. So this is your opinion on this. You have the word.
Okay.
Now, maybe you can speak. Somebody else can talk.
Somebody else want to come in from online?
Can you talk?
Yeah, I would like.
Josie, why don't you talk?
Yeah, I would like also to say something about the second and the third question, if it's possible, before we end. About the second question, I would like to briefly say that what we have been doing about in the intergenerational issue, it's to open the university to outside. We have never been just professors. We created last 3 decades about 10 non-governmental organizations in different areas. And those non-governmental organizations has been very helpful integrating our students and our and also there is this connection between the teaching, the research, and the professionals in those organizations. They came back to the university to study. So in those organizations, there are many doctoral students there are applying implementing the ideas of community psychology that we teach. We never had any problem in terms of freedom in our classes, particularly in our classes. We are completely free to deliver our ideas. There is no limits to say what we think, what we want to, and to discuss and to mobilize the students. Also, what we are doing lately, it's more the civic engagement. So we engage our students since the beginning, since the BA, to involve in the social activism. In terms of the recognition of the university, what we have been doing is to get grants from the European Union. The last grant, it was 2 million euros to research how to implement housing first in homelessness in Europe. And because we were the first Portuguese university receiving such a grant, the university has been recognizing our role as professors and researchers. So they are supporting the continuation of our department. The last question, I would like just to say, the network, it's okay. I have nothing against networks. I helped to organize the European network, many networks, but I suggest that inside of the network, we have to have networks for intervention, global intervention. For example, we have been having a very interesting, good experience in terms changing homelessness in the world. So because it's a network with a mission, with a perspective, not just in abstract, not just to get together and to talk, but to have networks inside of the network in school, about schools, about violence against women, about many different issues. That is my suggestion.
About Caroline talk about the third question. You want to Caroline can write or talk, whatever you want. You have the word now, Caroline. Non lo ragazzi che io non lo sente.
Second or third question. I'll say something very briefly about the intergenerational situation that I think both in the academy, but also in communities, young people are the most important voices, and they're often the most marginalized in both the academy and in communities. So that's the challenge for intergenerational work. In the UK, we have a community psychology festival that takes place every other year. And that's the place where young people, young students and prospective students, but also young professionals come and find inspiration and enthusiasm from the possibilities that community psychology can offer. In terms of the last question, I think we won't survive, and it doesn't make any sense for community psychology to be existing in isolation. We have to work with others to call out what's actually going on in areas of conflict, and not just fall into taking sides. So take the example from Ukraine versus Russia. We have to be prepared to call out NATO and highlight exactly how NATO and other forms of imperialism are actually operating in the world. And we can't just be silent on those things. We can't be silent on, Donata mentioned the role of powerful men, but we can't be silent on the role of men and the way in which masculinity is played out throughout the world. But my main point is that we have to, if we're going to address the big issues, we have to work in collaboration with others. I don't believe we can sustain a distinction between activism and professionalism. I don't believe we can sustain a distinction between community psychology and other disciplines. We have to be working on the edges, at the margins, and really stop trying to claim the disciplinary centre for ourselves. I'll leave that.
In there,
My
you can
turn.
give their opinion. The third question.
Yeah. So, yeah, in terms of the third question, I think on the one hand, one piece that a number of people have already mentioned is the melding of research and activism and perhaps professional activity working with marginalized groups. And I think when we see people doing that over the course of their career, we can think of it as a constructive pluralism, a kind of a recognition that there are many useful paths and roles for community psych folks. In terms of the second thought, I think that an international network of community psychologists could serve several useful functions. It can be a launching pad for collaborations to address some of the global issues and the different forms they may take in our different countries, issues of the sort Carolyn was enumerating. It also is a way for us to connect with one another more regularly than every other year, as these useful conferences have been doing. I hope that out of that work, a psychological sense of global community can develop and strengthen among members of our field. So I'll leave it at that.
Having a support role with the young psychologists, like mentorship network. They would like to create a selector mentorship. The other input was they would like to create something similar to what we didn't need. European network of psychology, they would like a planetary network of community psychology. So what do you think about the studio hypothesis? Do you have another hypothesis? Do you have something else to suggest for strengthening community psychology besides the one that we have to collaborate with others and so on? About this proposal, if you comment on each one. Okay, let's start from this. The two proposals that I've been receiving in the written part is one, to support what happened in Europe to young people who are alone in their countries or have very few other community psychologists. So I have some kind of sponsorship, or they call the guy from Japan said it would be important to have international, how we call it, kind of support in terms of mentorship, advice, and mutual effort this way. So it was like helping each other, like we did in Europe at the beginning. And the other one is, in fact, we should make it more available for everybody to be able to join this network and therefore create and then we have the second thought, that is the brand. So we already have the newspaper, the magazine, and the research we make in Italy. It's a magazine by Terry and Caterina, which is called Global Perspective, the new psychology global perspective. And here the idea we could just like the newsletter there, keeping things going there. So this is the consideration that people made as proposal that we could make. So I like your opinion on this proposal that I received. I think they're still in us, no? We just leave them a hearing until they have another caduta.
My response to the question was that we've got and I'm thinking it in the context of the international conferences that we've had since 2006. So there is an international network of people already who gets revitalized every time the conference has to develop. Out of the last conference, we've taken it upon ourselves in consultation with the broader committee to develop the website as a sort of an archive, but also as something that will become a resource as we populate that. So we've got, with permission, we've added the project that Wolfgang's got. There's a number of other global connections projects that people have started to develop in response to this need that you've identified and that others have obviously identified. And just and so what we do with that and whether we need to have structures and so forth, I think people have resisted this, but whether we have a network, I think in my view, a network still requires some people who's going to look after it, because otherwise these things don't survive and they don't stay. So someone has to work on it. There's multiple projects globally, small little groups in New Zealand, some groups in South Africa, some groups in South America, and so forth. They all are connecting up and looking at ways of sharing, distributing, and collaborating and supporting each other intergenerationally, interculturally, and across all sorts of other boundaries where there's shared interests and so on. So I think there's those sorts of possibilities, but I think that it can happen around this conference itself as a starting point.
So I'm not sure if I have much to add. I thought sorry? Yes, yes, I think the present, the others already mentioned some ideas. In thinking about my answer for this question, I thought about interdisciplinarity and making connections with people working in the field with activists. So I don't feel that I have much wisdom to share, but I think that we need to create more space to share experiences, knowledge, because I feel that sometimes this is missing, and to learn also with each other's basic things like doing participatory research action is something that we need to learn how to do it, or we can just try and do it. But I feel that there is some missing in terms of training to do those kind of approaches in research and practice, at least in my view. I would love to have more opportunities to have actual training on how to engage communities, how to work with communities. That could be something to develop as well. I think the global network will be great also because there is some topics that affect everyone, even in different ways, but climate change is one of them, but not only climate change. There is plenty of topics that deserve a global perspective, a planetary perspective, as Donata said. So more opportunities to work with other people from different contexts, different continents would be great. So I think that. Thanks. Thank you. I won't speak for long because I agree with some of what Maria has said. I think we have to think about whether it's a synchronous thing, in other words, whether it's online, and we've learned a lot through COVID, working online, whether we, different experts or people with expertise share things in particular time slots so that it's
at the same time. And this is an interesting concept of having people from different continents at the same time, or whether we think about asynchronous sharing on networks and so on. But I am also aware that from our context, the local challenges are perhaps very different from local challenges in other places. And this is where we have to think carefully about what's transferable and what needs to be developed bottom up in partnership. So yeah, those are just questions I have.
Yeah, I was thinking, what are the patterns of success of community psychology? Because I strongly believe that community psychology has been tremendously successful in the last 50 years. It's only 50 years, and it's what I see, even if we don't have a discipline like community psychology in Germany, we managed to bring community psychology to the European level, and it's there, and it doesn't go away. And we managed to bring community psychology ideas and concepts to many other professions, as we at the same time learn from other professions and other disciplines. But why is community psychology so successful? That's an interesting question. One thing is, we are really good in identifying societal problems and giving a voice to societal problems. And then we have two parts in a way. One part is we are working for people who are having problems, so it's people who are abandoned, things like that. And that's mostly on the local level. But the new thing with the planetary sense of community is that there are global problems we need to tackle, we need to identify, and this is a type of thing where we need to go together with others, because we need to start a process of transformation of our systems, of our settings, like you said before, Jackie. And that's maybe a new challenge we have to learn about. And we have to, as I said, to redesign or re-identify what is the role of community psychology in that case. And that's so what I vision is not only a network of planetary network of community psychologists, because that would be kind of, it's the old type of formative way. But what we could do is something like a sharing network and exchange and internships and all these kind of things, which we can do with digitalization much easier than before, on the level of how can we help people in problems. And at the same time, a much more political network, which is going together like Students for Future, Scientists for Future, which is kind of beyond the traditional idea of community psychology. And that's maybe, there are two tracks in a way. And it would be interesting to try to reflect what could be the development of these two tracks. But I think we should have two tracks.
Time is almost up, but we still have some time before 11:30. Exactly 5 minutes. And I want to thank everybody for the contribution tonight. And I think this last question is very important. And we'll see what the other groups, tomorrow we are meeting. I remember that I will remind everybody that tomorrow at 4:15 Naples time, we have the meeting between North and South America. And then also Saturday, we have the last meeting with Asia, and some of the people who are right here, they're still in Naples. And I think the decision we'll have to take or the suggestion we can make are important because they are different problems. I agree with you, they are different problems. The problem of the person who wants to have some mentorship, and it's better to have mentorship from far away than the one you may be fighting in your school. You know, it's important to have people, you know, that willing to mentor people away. And also is what she, as a young person, says, sharing and learning. So there's like, you know, internship of visiting professors. Like I had the chance to go to England, you know, and learn some stuff. And this we can quick an international network and do that. And then maybe have a more, it seems to me that one characteristic of community psychology, more than any other science, is that it changes everywhere depending on the setting where it's developed. As we said before, in South Africa, they had a particular setting and something particular was born. And that's true. In Italy, we had a particular setting that was done by the way the subjects were put in academia. And we created clinical community psychology and social community psychology, which is completely, you know, almost a particular. But this compelled us to put together this role and the radical, you know, kind of working for change, transformative change roles. So we confirm our discipline in 50 years, confirm the theory that the discipline is partly shaped by the world in which it's in, and it's very adaptable. So we are all community psychology, but we all do same thing and different things, depending on the place we are. Not only, but we become more radical or less radicalized, depending on where we are, and depending on what's happening. Now, for instance, in Europe, the situation we had with COVID and with Russia invading Ukraine is radicalizing again in Europe the situation. And so I submit that in a few years, community psychology is changing again in Europe because we are going to meet another world. And I think that's the fascination of our discipline. And so I want to thank you all about this. And I think one of the reasons we survive is because we have this knack of finding problems, not so much finding solution, but finding problem, but trying very hard to find solution. And sometimes we do. For instance, in one problem like the homeless, you know, we have found some solution. The other problems we are not. But climate change, today we had a nice workshop in which, you know, we almost came out with a third way to do the workshop. You know, it was very good. Putting together Bill, you know, which is a scientist, me who is a community psychology, she who is a dreamer, because that's the generation of their dream. And she put us on the, not in unconscious, but on imagination. You would have loved the imagination. And you should see what came out, even for me. I mean, we put together all this stuff, but it was amazing. In a few minutes, we were very lucky because we're not very many. But today, I'm very good in picking up one transformation of the workshop in the future with the schools very differently, adding this thing. And I'm sure she'll add something that she found in us. And certainly she adds what all the data Bill piled up. They almost, you know, put us, you know, the world is going to go so bad that we are going, and then we went up again. It was very interesting. It was like being a roller coaster. And I think that's what psychology is. Community psychology is a kind of roller coaster. You go up and you go down, but it's not only us, is we are most reactive to, we are very good perceptor of what happens in the ambience around us, more than other disciplines, because other disciplines are more sheltered, you know, they are more inside-ward. Instead, ours is an outward-looking profession, an outward-looking discipline, and that's why Orphan, who likes change, has been changing in all the 40 years I've met him. That is true. I met him when he was doing self-help group, and it was not just, he had organized in Munich a center where you went there and said, I need a self-help. What kind of stuff you need? Blah, 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 blah. And he put together all the people because he likes to put together. He's always been interdisciplinary, you know. But so every time I try to understand what he does, he's already doing something else. And that's one of the reasons I like him very much, you know. But that's why the reason is kind of difficult. So I thank you very much. I'm sorry it didn't work very well here, but it's the setting. I mean, I've done this thing before, and if you have a good platform, and it doesn't happen, you know, earthquake and stuff like that, you can really work with people in different parts of the world. And I'm sure they're listening to us there still. And thank you very much. And tomorrow you're welcome to listen. They'll send the links. And if you don't receive the link, tell Caterina, not me. Not today, but for tomorrow. You already have the link for tomorrow, all of 4 of you? Caterina, come here and tell them. No, because they can't
a link for tomorrow, but it will work at the time. It will not work the day before or 2 hours early. So please be quiet. You have it, you got it, and be quiet, because we cannot receive so many call requesting things that you already have.
She's being the godmother. I am being the godmother. La madrina, sai quella che fa? Però fa anche i miracoli. La conosci, scusa? La madrina, quella che fa i miracoli. La madrina. Oh, the godmother.
I think perhaps the meeting should end.
La madrina.
Stepmother, I was okay. Anyway, I want to say,
because your tone was one of a stepmother, but your heart is a godmother.
okay, but my words are saying that we want to collect this wonderful round table, because it is very extraordinary that we were able to talk respecting time zone of all over the world, and starting from Australia, then Australia is here and we don't need it. But anyway, in Australia, they can follow
We have
us.
David in Australia.
Yes, and Australia and the other people in Australia
And
can
Chris
follow
is-
us.
Imagine, just 1 second, imagine where they all are and how beautiful it is that we are together. You know, they are miles and miles away.
Yes,
And we are
but
listening.
we want to keep all this experience, and then we are going to prepare 2 special issues of 2 journals, and so we will have a huge article using the material of this planetarium section, and you all are invited to be part of. So these little pieces you prepare, they will be part of a bigger piece. And this extreme interesting experience that Donata told, and I think that give an added value to the conference, starting and dialoguing all together, all around the world in the same times in 3 days. So
On the same topics.
on the same,
Because they dialogue all the time on different topics.
so we will arrive. I don't know if we arrive to an end, but anyway,
We started the process.
we start.
And we want to thank the staff I want personally, because I know the difference. They are not working on a platform. There are 3 young girls who were trying to have an emergency meeting in a pizzeria next to a bathroom. Lots of people coming in and out. So actually, it's a Napoleon creativity.
11 o'clock in the night
And,
here.
and also, it's almost midnight here. It's almost like Cinderella, we are going to disappear. So it's really a godmother that we have here. And she prepared this interesting thing. And I want to all to have the AWE, the miracle that human beings can create when they have collaboration, like Jackie kept telling us.
Yes, but what we try is to have a new tool, to have a new tool of a new method. We talk about participation. If we talk about participation, we should find out the way to participate. And so we have our photographer, that is Marina, she's Brazilian, and she is the time zone expert. she checked. Yes, she checked all these session of the conference, looking at the time zone of the participant. And so now I was keen, now I can make an exam. What time is it now in Chicago? What time is it now in
So it's still in the afternoon. Chicago is still in the afternoon, I can tell
So
you.
now we know at which time we can meet each other, because in Europe's morning time is the worst.
Yeah.
Then it's the worst. Then afternoon time is good with South America. In the evening time, Europe collects Australia, North America, and South America. Now I can go to an exam to prepare. So anyway,
Tomorrow anyway, we are meeting South and North America, Latin America, okay?
okay.
Bye-bye, buonanotte, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And good day for New Zealand and ciao, ciao.
Bye bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye bye. No, prima che ho scritto.
Allora,
Bye bye.
It's great.